quorum of participants, so I think we can get started. This is the Metro Blue Line Extension Corridor Management Committee. I said that all in one word. I often call it the CMC, but thank you all for being here. I'm Charlie Zully. I'm the chair of Met Council and I'm honored to be chair of this committee. We've got one major item for today's agenda, and that really is to hear about the cost and the ridership projections. And because it's so important, we want to kind of give this meeting to that subject. But before we start, I might, as usual, go around the table, and we can, as people are assembling, we can introduce ourselves. And I've introduced myself, so I'll go to on my right.
Excellent. Irene Fernando, Hennepin County Board.
Jeff Wendy, Hennepin County Board.
Carla Arredondo, Blue Line Coalition.
Candy Bacon, Blue Line Coalition. I left my name tag at home, I'm so sorry.
Dr. Tara Watson, Business Advisory Committee, Minneapolis.
Meg Forney, Minneapolis Park Board.
Suzanne Sabatka, Mayor Fry's office. The mayor will be joining a little bit later.
Yasin Osman, Met Council, District 7.
Jim Adams, Crystal Mayor.
Connie Saibjam, Mindat, Metro District.
Leslie Canderas, Metro Transit General Manager.
Reba Chambliss, Metropolitan Council District 2 and Vice Chair.
And we were joined by Mayor.
I'm Mayor Bill Blonigan of Robbinsdale.
Welcome. And another mayor.
Mayor Hollis Winston, Brooklyn Park.
Great to see you. Thank you all for giving us your afternoon. Couple of housekeeping items. As usual, those who have been here before know that these mics are live and we are streaming for those that might be watching at home or office. And for those that would like to make comments who are not here publicly, feel free to email our website email address, bluelineext.org. And we will ensure that our outreach professional, Nkongo Cigolo, will capture those comments. And if they're before Friday, March 22nd, we'll make sure that they're on the website and that any comments will be captured there. So again, our agenda is fairly brief, but we always have time for our public comment, and we always give 15 minutes for public testimony and remarks limited hopefully to 3 minutes. And we have two people who have signed up here, and I would invite Candy Bacasia.
No, it's bacon. Can I do that?
I can't read it. That's on me.
That's my scribbles.
Well, Candy, I'm just gonna say Candy Bacon.
Candy Bacon. That's me.
It's you're even though you're sitting here, please you can make your comments. Thank you.
Okay. What happened to Shua? She was first and printed.
I have two here, and then I also have John Barubas.
Okay. Do you mind if I go first, Shua? Okay. Okay. So I was at my Senate District Town Hall meeting yesterday, and I would like to propose that this body would make a recommendation to go after the anti-displacement funding at the Met Council and to fully fund our anti-displacement and implementation.
Any more comments?
I think that's a suggestion comment.
Okay, I may respond to that in a minute, but we're gonna hear some public comment, so
Makes
thank you,
sense.
Candy.
Thank you.
Is there a John Barubas here? Yeah. Okay, come forward. And we're joined by Commissioner Green. Welcome, Marianne.
Have a seat, that's your spot.
Free to sit or stand.
there.
I didn't have a question, or I didn't have anything prepared.
So did you know that you signed as a speaker?
I signed the wrong form. Anyway.
Well, because you signed it, you're obligated to speak. Sorry. No, you don't have to.
My apologies.
That's okay. You're probably wondering, what are we being asked? Okay. No, we have opportunities for members of the public to make comments up to 3 minutes. And
Thank you. I signed the wrong sheet. Now I
that's all right. Did anybody sign the wrong sheet, another sheet, and wish they had the opportunity to speak for 3 minutes? You do? Okay. Yeah, please come forward. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Shua Salas, and I'm from ACER, which is African Career Educational Resources out in Brooklyn Park. Over the last 5 years of my career, I have worked alongside cultural commercial corridors that have been shaped by light rail projects, such as the Green Line Extension project in St. Paul. I'm very excited about the opportunities that anti-displacement represents for our community members. And we work, own businesses, and go to school on the corridor of the Blue Line Extension. However, I'm concerned about the lack of a plan that can be directing us to the same destination, which is prosperity. In order to get there, we need to have a plan that we can share with our communities, with your constituencies, and around how we are going to translate all of our good intentions into actions. We appreciate the support of Commissioner Lundy, Councilmember Chambliss, and all other elected officials who are taking steps to support us. We are looking not only to survive the construction of the Blue Line Extension, but also to thrive after it. Perhaps we can create a cultural commercial corridor in Brooklyn Park as well also. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other members of the public? All right, now we are going to review the meeting summary from our meeting on February 8th that was sent out in advance. If there's any additions, subtractions, corrections, questions, this is a good time. Otherwise, I would entertain a motion and a second to approve the meeting summary.
So moved.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Commissioner. Any more discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, those meeting summaries are approved. And there are no reports this meeting from the the community and business advisory groups. And just quick, before we introduce Nick, and I think Dan, joined by Dan Solar, we're going to talk about cost and ridership. Candy mentioned support for anti-displacement. I think that's deserving of a comment on behalf of Met Council. Just actually made aware of that late last night. Actually had no kind of participation or understanding of what that is. But I have to say I reflect on the importance that we have resources for anti-displacement. And it brings me back to when I was on the Corridors of Opportunity Committee for the original Green Line. This is a central corridor, and we had a funders collaborative. I sat on 15 years ago on the Corridors of Opportunity. This was a group of foundations, local governments, Met Council, counties that came together to ensure that there was investment for how those impacts would be along University Avenue. And I think that was really important principle about having a number of people at the table, bringing the proper resources, in some cases, national resources. And we've certainly been in conversation with Commissioner Lundy and others about how we have to stitch that together. So I think right now, it'd be premature for me to say that it would be any one entity, in this case, Met Council. Certainly, there's a lot of resources. The Met Council is determining where best to invest in. It has a strong commitment in anti-displacement, as I know Hennepin County does, and other local governments. So we'll have an opportunity to stitch that together. Appreciate the sentiment, but that's not one that we're prepared to say that any one little particular legislative proposal is going to be the answer, because we know that any one proposal can't be the answer. So anyway, appreciate the thought.
80-20.
Appreciate the thought.
Mr. Chair.
All right, yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I will say the corridor communities, including Hennepin County, are bringing a legislative proposal to begin that, the anti-displacement fund. What we have written down with authors is 10 million each year for 5 years, which I'm sure you're aware of. Thanks for the recommendation. And of course, all of the locals should absolutely be taking this question as actionably as possible. But of course, the chair can speak for Met Council. I know that it was directed, but I will say thanks to everyone who brought forward that legislative platform. I know it's something that we have been advocating for at session and are, of course, eagerly awaiting how it will prevail. But really appreciate you raising it.
Thank you.
And I'll just respond briefly myself to that. There are Met Council members that have reviewed the anti-displacement and prosperity platform. And I know that several of them are going to be speaking in favor of anti-displacement and prosperity. But we are just getting the information on the bill in the House and the Senate. And I personally am in support. You'll hear more.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks, everyone.
One more thing, if I may.
Oh, go ahead.
I will just, we'll make it a point to share out the bill numbers in the Senate and the House files, because they are filed, so I think you're asking the question, what's being specifically done. I can get you copies of those, I'll make sure that the whole CMC gets a copy of that.
We're here to hear from Nick Thompson and Dan Solar about really a big project update, having cost and ridership information. So with that, this is really the bulk of the meeting, and any questions anybody might have, but take it away, Nick.
Thanks, Chair and members. So as you recognize, I'm sitting at this chair instead of Chris Beckworth. We had sent out a note to the CMC a couple weeks ago about change in leadership. Chris has taken on a new role outside of the Metro Transit and supporting projects just like this for FTA around the country. So an asset to other projects, but we will miss her. She is watching right now if anybody wants to wave at her.
Hello, Chris.
Because she can't get too far away. So today's an important day. We want to talk about cost, ridership, and whether this project is federally rated for funding from federal, as we know today. Talk about what's going into that cost estimate and ridership. And, you know, we've sent this information out to you in advance, but we really want this opportunity for ask us questions about it too. So as we go through, feel free to ask questions on any slide. We don't need to wait till the end for questions, and I think we have plenty of time for that. So Dan and I will talk about the different elements of that. So we always start with this slide. It's even more important today because this is the slide that the cost and ridership is based on. It's the project. It's both how long the project is, how many stations there are, what's elements of that construction of that, but also importantly, when we are forecasting constructing this project. The years that we constructed are very much in the cost estimate. Changes in schedule can be a change in costs as we see on other projects. But so there's no change to this slide from what we've presented, but it's really just thinking about our cost estimate and ridership is really based on this scope, and we will get into a lot more detail about exactly what's in the base cost. Our look ahead on this project, this has not changed. We continue to believe we can maintain this schedule for 2024. We had said last month we'd be coming with cost and ridership. We're here today. April and May is when we will focus more on, in April we'll talk about Met Council and Hennepin County's anti-displacement framework. We'll opportunity for each of the communities along the line to provide updates also. It still looks very strong that the supplemental draft EIS is on schedule to be released for public comment starting in June. And then we also will continue to maintain, we believe, the municipal consent process to complete in October. So again, this is an estimate for this year that seems to be right on track. So there's three pieces of information today. Federal project rating, which is the federal rating for the project compared to other for federal funding. There's the cost and the schedule. So I'll start with the project rating process. We are essentially a project in the Capital Investment Grant Program of FTA. And so whether a project receives funding is guided by criteria that FTA sets. We are essentially in competition with other projects around the country for limited grant funds in this program. And so in order to manage that competition, FTA has sought a scoring mechanism for how you score a project or rate a project. There's two parts to the circle. We're going to show you half of the circle today. The other half of this circle is about local ability to fund the local share, which in our case, in our region, we're in a strong position. We have funding sources to fund the local share of a project like this. And we've always rated very strongly in that category in our region based on our funding sources. So the other half of the circle is what you see here on the screen. There are 6 elements that are scored based on criteria that FTA sets. Same criteria for any competing project in the program. And overall, you need a medium or higher rating for a project like this to be justified for federal funding. We are at a stage now that we're forecasting a rating. We have not received any input from FTA that what our rating would be. That comes at a later step. But we have pretty good knowledge about how the scoring works, what the inputs are. So we are projecting right now at least a medium rating for this project, which is the threshold you need to clear to be eligible for federal funding. So that's a great news story. That you can see individual ratings, but really the overall is at least a medium is what you need, and we forecast under current criteria that we are there. I say current criteria because FDA has indicated that they are updating this criteria for how things are scored, and we do not know what those updates will be. We believe strongly, based on indications from FDA, that I think our project will even get stronger ratings if new criteria is adopted by FTA before we ask for official criteria.
So if they update the criteria and the project becomes low, what's your plan B?
Chair, committee member, our goal is to be medium or higher. So we will take the updates and then reflect on what changed in the updates, and then come back to this committee and others if we need to make changes. But we have we believe there's a project here that reads medium or higher, even with change criteria. So. Process-wise, process remains the same. We are in the engineering phase of project delivery. These are the process for FTA. We're a little bit unique in this case, so we've said before, is that because we were in engineering when the original alignment paused, we are going back a little bit and doing some things that are in project development, like the supplemental environmental update. But FTA still considered us in the engineering phase of the project. Once we complete that, we apply for federal funding before entering construction. So no changes here. It's a long process that continues past the opening of the line, but we remain in this phase of the project.
All right. The University Avenue project, what did that rate? Was that a medium? Do you remember?
It was, Chair.
Yeah.
Dr. Watson, it was medium or medium high. Yeah, I mean, the criteria back then, this goes numerous administrations ago, was different, and there was something at that time called a cost effectiveness index, the CEI, that was kind of a secondary piece where you had to not only have a medium rating, but you had to also have a certain score in the CEI. And so that caused some, when there was the discussion of adding additional stations, we had to work on how we were able to do that, but still maintain the cost effectiveness index. And so, here in our region, the need to get federal funding has been important. So the creation and advancement of these projects from Blue Line to Green Line Extension, and now here to Blue Line Extension, has been to develop projects that meet these ratings.
Thank you.
I believe each project in our region that has received federal funding has been medium or medium high. achieving high is a very high bar to achieve. So ridership, a question that we get a lot about this. So there are kind of three ridership numbers we're going to provide you this year, maybe a third one this year. So I'm going to talk about where we're at today. Our ridership that we're talking about is based on FTA guidance of how to calculate ridership. We're in this transition phase of ridership. We had ridership before COVID, a fairly stable number over time. And then with COVID and the pandemic, we had a big drop in ridership throughout the country in certain terms of transit. And then post-pandemic, we've been growing very strongly in our region in ridership, but we're still probably at a phase where we're not at the stable, normal ridership. We're still in a growth mode post-pandemic. And so here and around the country, they're trying to figure out how do you forecast a ridership under that environment. So the ridership numbers we'll give you today is based on FTA guidance where they say use a blended model of ridership, which takes base ridership that you had in 2019 in your region, and then combine it with what your ridership was in 2022. And then forecast from that number. We anticipate that guidance is likely to change in future updates to maybe only using post-pandemic ridership. But for today, this is the guidance FDA has, and so that's the numbers we will provide today. We do know that our next update that we provide as soon as this summer will use 2023 data in the post-ridership because we do have new data for 2023. That is larger than 2022 ridership. And we forecast out to a forecast year in our region. Our models are updated to 2045. Previous projects were either 2035, Green Line Extension, other projects have been 2040. So it's really based on how current your model is that's sort of maintained by the Met Council. So it's a blend of pre and post ridership, post-COVID ridership. So this is an extension of Blue Line, existing Blue Line. So we want to think about this number in terms of the extension ridership, what that'll be added, and then overall, what will Blue Line operate ridership-wise when both segments are open? Because after opening day, ride on the Blue Line is a ride on anywhere on the Blue Line, and so that's the number you need to think about after we open. So we're forecasting today a ridership on the Blue Line extension of between 11,500 and 13,000 per weekday in the forecast year. Again, that's 2045. And that's you add that with the existing Blue Line, that's 30,000 or more riders per day. That would put us in the second highest ridership line in the metro area. Green Line Extension has a little bit higher ridership than Blue Line Extension, but light rail are the two highest ridership lines for transit in our region. So that $30,000 ride number is really sort of a forecast of what Blue Line is today. Today, there's about 18,000 riders today on Blue Line on a weekday. And we had to project out how that will grow, plus how when we open Blue Line Extension, how they'll grow together from that point on. So this is where our forecast is founded on. It's a model-based forecast with both today's data for the existing Blue Line and this blended model of pre and post-COVID for the Blue Line Extension. You know, this is a forecast. There's a lot of things that can happen in that, but this is what we feel minimum ridership would be when we open Blue Line Extension. So one way to think about where ridership will come from, Blue Line Extension segments, this is both the communities that we're building this line in, proposing to build this line in, has both a very well-established transit network, and then we're in, Crystal, Robbinsdale, Brooklyn Park. That's an area that we don't have today really strong service, or we're lacking service. And so it's both, we're building in an established marketplace for transit with strong connections and expanding into essentially new transit markets. And so you'll see different ridership forecasts. The Minneapolis segment has really strong connections to C and D line and other routes, so they'd be strong ridership segments at the start. And then we have to build connecting networks to the stations to the north. So that's a way to think about what we're building, both in established and new markets for transit. Who we're serving, it's not just a number in this forecast, it's a population that will be users of that. So we look at, in the immediate, essentially walking distance of the line, the demographics that we're projecting, 55% BIPOC population, 14% of the community within that have zero cars. Transit is one of their main options for travel. That number is an important one, and when we talk about at the end that's 14% of the households that live there. In terms of the riders, roughly 50% of the riders are forecasted to be those who do not have access to an automobile. 16% in population within that half mile are below the poverty level established. It's a younger population. That's a strong ridership base demographically for us, and 5% veteran. Blue Line Extension has 7 schools, 5 libraries, 5 healthcare facilities within walking distance of stations. And then if you think about the overall Blue Line, that expands from there with downtown airports, other facilities on the existing Blue Line that we are connecting to.
So back to that slide, can you remind us how this compares to other lines, these statistics of 55% and population under 25 and without cars? Is this a favorable comparison compared to other lines that we're in competition with and in comparison to other lines in the metro area?
Chair and Mayor, I would say the top 3, this is higher than some of the other lines, but we can get you the actual data. I don't have that offhand, but we do have that data. In comparing to who we're competing for nationally for federal fundings, this is strong, very strong data in that sense, compared to the other ones.
All of that seems to be very favorable to me.
Yep. It's a strong demographics for transit user population.
We talk often on this line about not only number of people that we serve, but the people that we serve. And so we want to provide a line like this in an area where there's a definite demand for other modes of transportation.
Thank you.
So now we'll get into the cost estimate and the ranges, and then I'll start with the first couple, and then Dan will talk about the base, what goes into this. So we definitely wanted to be very transparent about what's in the cost, what is not in the cost, and where we're at today in the project. So we are thinking about this in 2 elements, both base cost, which is what we know today. We're very early in the design, so there are a lot of unknowns yet, and we'll talk about that. And then we wanted to apply a sufficient contingency to that to cover the things that are unknown at this point. We have some guidance on how much contingency you use on a project from FTA. They set required contingency levels based on where you're at in the design. Today, we're at a point we think we need a range of a contingency of between 35% and 45%. The next update you have will be probably 33% or 40% contingency on that, and a better estimate of our costs. So think about it in terms of kind of the bottom line. That's our range of costs to build this project between $2.9 billion and $3.2 billion. We break that down into categories. This is how we track costs under FTA. It's even more detailed than this, but generally actual construction is the bulk of the cost. We are early in the right-of-way estimates, but we're estimating a right-of-way cost at this point.
What is a right-of-way?
That is property acquisition, either temporary or permanent acquisition of individual property. And then the work that goes into acquiring that property and relocation cost and elements like that. Vehicles is the vehicles to operate the train and supporting vehicles. Professional services, a big part of that. That's our engineering, our consulting, our other staff costs over the life of the project. And then we always anticipate at this stage that we finance some of the cost, and so there's a finance charge, but that is something that can change over time. This is a placeholder for that.
So a little bit about, thanks, Nick, a little bit about how we develop these costs, because we want to make sure that we are as inclusive about what's in the base. As we lay out a cost, I mean, no one wants to see that there's continual cost increases, so we need to make sure that we're trying to cover all the costs that are associated. So one of the big things that is driving this particular estimate is just how construction costs have inflated over the last number of years. And we're seeing that in a lot of industries. We're seeing that in similar projects around the country, that costs are going up, and we've got a graph here to show a little bit about where this is. So the last time we did a cost estimate and set the budget for this project, we were setting that budget assuming we were gonna be doing construction in 2017, 2018, 2019 timeframe, which now we're gonna be similarly or close to 10 years different. So we've had to build that inflation into it. And of course, these projects become so big that we cannot, while we're estimating the construction cost in today's dollars, because that's what we know, but it would cost to build it today, we then have to inflate those numbers as well so that we reflect the construction cost estimate on the years when this will take place. So generally that sets it to where the midpoint of construction is. And so for this, it would be kind of like midpoint of construction would be 2028. And so assuming construction's gonna take place in 27, 28, and 29 with an opening day in 2030, the costs that we've calculated here are reflected in those. So that kind of covers inflation. The other thing then is covering scope. And so this, of course, assumes that, so a great deal, the majority of this Blue Line extension is a street-running LRT system built in West Broadway, County Road 81, Washington Avenue. And so roadway reconstruction, full roadway reconstruction as part of building the LRT line is part of it. The Bass Lake Road interchange, which many of you have seen at Bass Lake Road and Highway 81 in Crystal, is in here. Stations, 12 stations total. The previous cost estimate, or the previous project had 11 stations. This project now has 12, and we continue to talk about possibilities of another. And so if that becomes the case, we're always gonna be setting, this is what's in. And so right now, this includes those 12 stations. It includes the 21st Avenue Bridge over I-94, which is where we're crossing I-94. But it also, of course, and I'll show this on some other slides, includes some other structures as part of the project as well. Now, there's a lot of risk in moving a project forward, and so the contingency helps get set based on the risk. But as we've learned in this region, there's a couple things that carry a greater amount of risk than others. Building tunnels carries a tremendous amount of risk. We don't have any tunnels proposed for this project. And a risk that we had at one time on this Blue Line extension, building 8 miles of light rail next to an operating freight in BNSF, is a risk that we don't have anymore. And we've seen that, I've seen just, personally, the difficulty of building Southwest LRT next to an operating freight is real. And there's unanticipated costs that have come up. So it's also what's in the project and then what risks there are that are not part of this as well. This next slide references construction cost trends, and this is what we're seeing. This is what we're seeing over time. So you see a fairly, kind of a little bit jagged, but a fairly flat line. And as 2019 has turned into 2023, supply chain issues and how materials are moved around just increased materials costs on project, where labor shortages have been, reduced competition has just resulted in much higher construction costs. And so our numbers have to take that into account. And then, of course, as I said earlier, we reflect a escalation cost on construction in the future that takes into account the fact that these construction costs are rising faster. So this becomes a piece of how we pull our costs together. So we showed a base cost and then we showed contingency. And this chart is one that we've kind of worked on over time to show how a cost estimate turns into a budget and how contingency amounts change over time. And so want to be clear, as we've established the contingency is not there to add new stuff to the project. The contingency is there to cover unknowns that are there today that we haven't developed in 15 onto 30, onto 60, onto 100% design. And I want to give a couple examples today of where that is. The biggest one being when we do an estimate here, we've got a real good idea of what this route means from a two-dimensional standpoint, right? We're going to build tracks, we're going to build a road, we're going to do those things, and we figured out those costs. The contingency is largely there to tackle what I call the third dimension. Now it's time to start looking at what's in the ground, what might be there. So some things we have underway. We have soil borings going on all over the alignment to determine, are there contaminated soils, are there unsuitable soils for building on? That'll have an impact on what the cost might be to build roads, to put tracks there, to do those kind of things. Where we're building bridges, we'll be taking soil samples to know what level of foundations will we need to meet. Where will we need retaining walls? What kind of we might show a retaining wall on a plan. That's easy. We know we need a wall. That wall can range from $1 million to $20 million or so, depending on the level of conditions, the footings, the conditions that are there. That's where we are with exploration. We have a phase 2 well underway right now to analyze what contamination sites are out there, where we're going to have to mitigate, where we're going to have to make those pieces. Contingency is there for those unknowns. A big one that we talk about, and we're really learning a lot right now, has to do with utilities. We can see roadways. We can see we're going to build it here. Where are the current utilities? Where are we going to need to move utilities? Where are we going to have to relocate utilities? And that can be public utilities, sewer, water, storm sewer, and then, of course, a lot of private utilities. Excel, perfect example. We are understanding right now, right on 10th Avenue, as the alignment goes, there's a utility there that Excel has, and Excel has distribution lines, Excel has transmission lines. We have hundreds of interactions with Excel. We're seeing a transmission line there that we are going to have to determine can stay, has to move, gets rerouted. What does that mean? How does that impact both project cost and project schedule? And that's one example of many utilities along here, all the way along the alignment. And so any of those pieces can have impacts on project cost. That's what contingency is there for, and they can have impacts on project schedule. So when we set, as Nick introduced this, and we've set a schedule, we've set a project cost here, we have this contingency, and as we know more, that contingency becomes real design, so it changes from the light blue to the green, and the overall project budget, as you can see, doesn't necessarily change, but the contingency goes down as well. But it can't go to zero. We need a good deal of contingency going into construction as well because of the things we'll find during construction.
Right, and we've been joined by Mayor Fry. Mayor, did you have a question or comment?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I want to appreciate all the work that you've done in terms of the due diligence and preparation for some form of municipal consent. I know it's taken quite a bit of work, and obviously construction costs and the development expenditures can change, and certainly they have. The new figures that have come out are very high. The question that I have has to do with the example that you just gave, and we've been hearing a series of rumors, and I just wanted to get just the straight facts so we're not spreading misinformation here, from the horse's mouth, as you say. And my understanding, or what we've been hearing, is that this Excel line, specifically over at 10th Avenue through North Loop, cannot have rail run parallel to it. It can have rail cross it, but cannot have rail run parallel to it. And a shift of that line or an accommodation for it would both be an exorbitant cost and add, what we're hearing is, many years to the project timeline. That is an important part of the equation that we're going to have to look at when granting municipal consent, in addition to the question of light rail stops. And for us in Minneapolis, it's specifically the one when you make that right-hand turn onto Washington. But what is the deal with this line? Is it an impediment to the project? Are we looking at either changing the route or dramatically expanding the number of years that it will take to accommodate it?
Sure, Chair. And
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll start, yeah, so this is a utility that we discovered probably in the last 6 weeks working with Excel. And today we don't have a solution to it, but we anticipate a couple steps here. Excel is being a great partner on this. That's a 70-year-old transmission line that's been there. There's some desire they've expressed to, there's a life to these transmission lines, and so there's some interest in how they deal with that infrastructure that is theirs. We're taking a wide look at what are our options here, as we do at this phase of design. There are some design considerations that our engineering team thinks can co-locate with that line, but we need Excel to weigh in on that, and we have meetings coming up with Excel in the next couple of weeks that the city will be invited into to consider what our options are. And then we have other route options that we would consider if we need to move it. And then we could look at staying there as they relocate the line if that's an outcome. So there's a bunch of options that are on the table, I think. We are happy to provide this group more detailed options at the next CMC, because I think between now and then, with our meeting schedule with Excel, we're gonna have a lot more information. Our current goal is that we can maintain the release of the supplemental draft EIS schedule as planned, because it is a draft and we can update that in EIS over time as we learn more. And we believe there are paths to maintain a municipal consent schedule. We still need more information on what options we have with Excel. Dan, do you want anything?
Chair, Mayor, I guess I would just add, I've finally, with Nick, gotten the first chance to kind of take this beyond the technical level at Excel and elevate it up to their leadership. And the most important part, I think, for us to have gotten to now is for our leadership at the county and Met Council and Excel's leadership to understand we've got these competing pieces. And so I think it becomes is there a path forward that lets us work together? If we were building this project next year, the ability for them to relocate would absolutely add a number of years onto the project. Because we are not starting construction until 2027, is there a path forward where we can work together to have something change to that line? Is there a way to design it where we can reconstruct light rail on 10th Avenue? That line can stay in place, they can relocate it, and then that line can stay and be abandoned later? Or is there no path forward and we talk about a different route? Each of those has different cost impacts. Each of those has different schedule impacts. And so we've elevated this to the point where over the next number of weeks, that's really where we want to get with Excel's leadership.
Yeah, Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you for the answer. So Will we have this information by the next CMC meeting? By this information, I'm talking about the extension of time that it will take to build the project and the increase in money. And if not, I mean, at the very least, you can understand that we're going to need that well in advance of a municipal consent vote.
Chair and Mayor, there's two parts to that. We'll have options available. We won't have a final decision by then. Options, we can update you. You know, time and increased costs go together.
Right.
For the project. If we maintain the schedule as we've talked about in the base cost, there might not be a project cost implication, because it might be a utility-related cost. But overall, there is a cost. It's a public utility. And so we'll have more information on that. But because we have not, you know, even started the engineering discussion with Excel, I think we won't have a final decision by next CMC, but we'll have a lot more information to present to you and the members about what are the potential impacts to schedule or alignment than we have today.
But sitting here today, it sounds like we're looking at a multiple year extension or multiple year delay.
Chair and Mayor, are you expressing about the project? There's a chance that it doesn't affect our schedule at all.
Okay.
That is but then if it's a relocation of the transmission line, that's its own public process. That's a public process for relocation of transmission line. That is varying lengths of time related to that, if that's one of the outcomes. So there's still a wide range right now today of possibilities.
Connie, do you have a comment?
Yes, just a question. Looking at this graphic, remind us what are the approximate dates of municipal consent for like the cities would have to, sort of city of Minneapolis? How much time do you have to figure this issue out?
Chair, Connie, based on the schedule, we anticipate later this summer we'd begin the municipal consent process, which is we present a 30% plan to each of the cities. And so we would need to know what the alignment is with the 30% design plan before we could start that process.
So by then you have to have it resolved or figured out what your path forward is with Excel.
Commissioner Fernando.
Yes, thank you. So I appreciate the discussion. I think, and I've also asked many of these types of questions, and I know there's folks watching at home and whatnot. I think what's important to stitch together with the slide that's up and the overall amount is the amount of contingency, both in time and in money, that is embedded into what's proposed. So the project office is not anticipating that we know everything now, but that whether it's a potential relocation of a utility or soil remediation or something else, that the project office has done its absolute comprehensive best, learning from our past projects and learning from across the country, that what's before us at the moment embeds $700 million to $1 billion of contingency. I mean, so that's not on top of the $3.2 billion, that's inclusive. And that's something that I needed to kind of breathe in myself, that included in both the time, project schedule is what it's called, and in the budget, the big numbers that we provided, embedded in that is a large amount of problem solving. A large amount of problem solving and partnership and various aspects of experts and approvals and public hearings, including adjacent requests and expectations, such as anti-displacement that's next to it, or partnership with utilities and others that's outside of the formal project scope. So I just want to share that there's the project schedule and the budget as proposed that embeds, is my understanding, a fair amount of time and some, a lot of zeros to try to make sure that we are problem solving live. Project office is problem solving line, but then we are bringing from our residents what residents are expecting to receive. And so it took me a number of meetings to make sure I understood that. So I wanted to say that out loud. And then I also wanted to offer a comment. While there's lots of zeros to this, it's an incredible investment for the corridor. There are residents on this corridor that cannot access the regional system. There are residents on this corridor that have been overdue multiple decades for this type of investment investment that will come through the project, investment that should come, supplementary or complementary, whether it's what we achieve with our locals or at the state, and absolutely the federal share. We want to have the right number. The 3.2 billion is the upper limit. We want to have the correct number because that's what makes us eligible for the federal match. When we have an accurate upper limit, that impacts the percentage, that impacts the amount of money that the potential kind of 50-50 share that could occur with the feds. So I just want to express that I know that everybody will have their own perspective on this, and I'm quite excited to see that we're at this stage. When we're at this stage, more questions and more problems need to be resolved, but we're at this stage, and as someone who's had the privilege of seeing the project move alignment, I actually live right off of the old alignment. I was quite sad to see it move from where I live. We weren't sure if we would be at a place where there'd be a new alignment, and so I just want to say, individually, as someone who is excited to ride the line, it is a big deal to be at a revised alignment in partnership with the FTA and anywhere near looking at a municipal consent process. So thanks for the indulgence, Mr. Chair.
No, absolutely. Go ahead, Dr. Watson.
I was just wondering if there is a number or a percentage where this project is no longer cost effective. Because I see the numbers, they're growing. Is there a place where it's just irresponsible? I mean, these numbers are huge, and this definitely isn't my arena, but is there a cutoff?
Chair and members, I mean, it's a great question. We're approaching this about federal eligibility. One, if you're eligible under the criteria, there is some cost effectiveness within that. That traits not just cost, but the benefits side of the project. And ultimately, that's a decision for policymakers as the project moves forward. So the numbers we're presenting today and the rating does talk about, according to federal criteria, is deemed a viable project at this point. So
I mean, one person's reasonableness might be different than
Absolutely.
another's.
So it's
No question
definitely
about
not-
that. So what we use then is the criteria as established by the Federal Transit Administration that says if your project has a cost and a projected ridership and an economic development benefit and a environmental benefit and all the things that go into that rating, if that scores there, then we, federal government, are saying it's reasonable to spend funding there. If we went to where that was not the case and it was only eligible for local funds, then it becomes a decision by policymakers where the reasonableness is. So in this region, that's been kind of our guide on when we're there, which is why we're so firmly set on focusing on those rankings.
I guess where I was getting thrown off was I'm hearing the match. So when I'm hearing the match, my thinking leads me to believe that there's a federal match to this, but dollars are coming from, our state, our cities, and just local money. And that's the struggle. Are we using the dollars, the right way? Because as these costs and the project length and which equal costs continue to rise, we're bleeding from other areas to make this happen. And yep, we're gonna get that federal match, but at what cost? So that's where the question came from. Thank you.
We got Commissioner Green and then Mayor Winston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Solar. I was going to name what's on slide 9, which are the multiple factors, because I think you asked such a good question, and certainly as I wrestle with the same question, I was looking at that slide and seeing the 6 factors, and I will say, just because I've been a part of conversations about other light rail lines, that a 100% return on investment by putting up $1 billion and getting $1 billion is very attractive for the region. It really is. And I'm just naming that as something that's swimming around as I wrestle with the same questions.
Thank you. Mayor.
So yeah, I'll make it brief, and I'm excused, but I have to leave a little early. But I will say that in terms of that cost effectiveness, I think, I've had discussions with Mayor Blonigan and Mayor Adams about this, and sorry to leave Mayor Fry out of this, but it was a Northwest Suburbs discussion. And I think one of the things that we had when we're talking about that economic development piece, I think a good statistic that my city is probably, city staff are probably tired of hearing of it, but we talk about Bloomington versus Brooklyn Park. Bloomington has 5.5 billion in commercial property development. Brooklyn Park has 2 billion. So when we talk about the economic development needs of our city, when we talk about just our basic ability to afford community activity centers or things that we need for youth, there is a gigantic gap in terms of economic development. So I think for me and for other folks I've spoken to, that economic development piece is, there is a good return on investment from our perspective. The other piece, when we talk about transportation, some of our cities, I think Robbinsdale, Crystal, deal with this a little bit. When we talk about east to west transportation within our cities, it is not built out. This builds some of that justification for that. So people who are kind of locked in and don't have that transportation, this also begins to build some of the justification for them to move from east to west. So from my perspective, I'm never going to speak for other mayors, right? But just based on some of the conversations we've had, there is I'm not going to go so far as to say segregation, but I can tell you in terms of the Northwest suburbs, there are some very real disparities. And so when we look at the 55% BIPOC that they're talking about that are along this line, and then I'm sure if you dive into those numbers and you look at the disparities around education, around income, around jobs, for us, this is, for many of us, this is an opportunity to begin to eat away at those disparities, which have been quite pernicious. So there's a price tag to it. But I think part of that price tag is it's a price that's never been paid that needs to be paid so that we can remove some of those disparities. So from our perspective as a city, yes, we have some, there are concerns in terms of how much of the cost is going to fluctuate. And I know that as we go through this, as any project of this size, things are going to come up. But in terms of the larger return on investment for a region, a whole region, multiple cities that have been serially underinvested in, I think for us, this is an important project.
Thank you. All right, back to you, Nick.
I would just add that today we're providing you 3 pieces of information: federal rating, draft, cost range, and ridership. There is more information that is part of the overall decision. When we release the draft environmental impact statements, you'll see the impacts of this from environmental. So there's that, there's the anti-displacement framework. So just think about, these are only 3 of the pieces of overall information you'll be receiving this year as you make a decision to recommend to go forward with the project. So.
We did talk a little bit, this talks a little bit about cost uncertainty, okay? And so we talked a little bit about some of the things we don't know. These next couple slides talk about what we do know. So when we've set the base cost for this, this is the scope as we know it. So this is kind of setting the fact that we are talking about building 13 miles of rail plus roadway reconstruction along this entire length, 12 stations. We've got 23 structures on this project, which include all the way from, full bridges, like on 21st or like on over Highway 610, to modified bridges, to pedestrian bridges. We've got a lot of walls on here. We've got a lot of earthwork, which, as many of you have heard me say, we are going to consider 400,000 cubic yards of contaminated earthwork because we're just finding that soils today are not reusable. They're just not, either from a contamination standpoint or just from a rubble and unsuitability standpoint. We've got a lot of traffic signals. We got miles and miles of communications and power cable. We've got 2 proposed new park and ride structures, one at Oak Grove Parkway and one in Robbinsdale. We've got guesstimated sizes of those, so there'll be some variance in there, but we're proposing new structures there. We've got a park and ride lot in Crystal. We've got the park and ride structure at 63rd, which will need some minor modifications, but is generally there. These costs include the operations and maintenance facility in North Brooklyn Park. It includes the acquisition of property, both permanent and temporary, associated with the project. It includes 32 new light rail vehicles. And then, of course, all the professional services from now till opening day and startup to deliver these, as well as the contingency and the finance cost to get there. So this scope is important because the intention is to hold the $3.2 billion upper cost limit and utilize contingency to deliver this scope as identified in these couple of slides. And as there are major changes to this scope, it'll be part of project leadership to determine, are we gonna accept those scope additions, which may then come with additional costs as well. And so this is an example of the kind of things. And you see updated utilities is a big piece here. I can say for certain, having worked on it, on Central Corridor, we replaced water main and sanitary sewer and storm sewer and improved all of those utilities as part of that, as well as improving all the street elements along here. So those are what are in there.
All right, Commissioner. Thank you, Dan, for that. I also wanted to highlight that some of those updating of sewer systems, water systems, actually take costs off of cities that may have paid that at a later date on their own. So some of that is a net benefit where the project is taking on a cost that, you know, if somebody, I'll just use my city, Brooklyn Park, had something, I know the water main goes right down West Broadway, and we've been waiting for 2 decades to get at it for this project. That will be a once in a, you know, opportunity to get into that ground for a water main that usually breaks once a year. So those kind of costs will be borne by the project, but have net benefit to the residents.
Chair and Commissioner Lundy, when I used to say Mayor Lundy, I heard often about we need to get there because this, we don't want to dig up a roadway and replace water main 1 year before we dig up the roadway and build light rail. And of course, that 1 year has become 2, become 5. And so that's part of why we want to get after some of those things.
So the way to think about that base cost that we just went through, that's the cost we will track. As scope, if scope changes, if there's added things beyond the base, we will be very transparent about how that cost is reflected. The base cost is our foundation for the 2.9 to 3.2. But if we go to 34 rail cars, we will say that wasn't part of the original base cost. Here's the cost of those extra 2 rail cars, so that we're really tracking how this base cost changes over time. I think we want to be more transparent about that than we've ever been on these projects, so that if the cost estimate changes, we can explain exactly why those cost estimates are changing. So prior to municipal consent, we'll have will be the next cost estimate update. So we will keep you up to date on that. How does this compare is a important question. There are 4 light rail transit projects currently in competition in the federal funding in the capital investment grant program. We are the one that's in engineering. The other 3 are sort of behind in the schedule. They're in the project development schedule. But on a per mile basis, we are the lowest cost of the 4, which is strong for competing for funding. Our region has been very effective compared to peers on a cost per mile for project development and construction. So this is right in line with what we have normally done per mile, or through factoring in inflation, but is much lower than the other 3 competing projects in the system. Now, these are not apples to oranges. You know, Seattle and California, they have other elements that drive the apples.
Apples to apples.
They are apples to oranges. You know, they have constraints that we do not have in our project, but we're all competing for the same federal pot of funding, and so we're in a strong position relative to other light rail projects that are currently in the program at the federal level.
So if I might, if I was a federal unbiased official, I might be comparing also cost per rider. So that is a chart that if you don't have, maybe you should get. Because somebody's going to argue that if you're not looking good on that.
Chair, Mayor, that's a good point. That data is available, and for their forecasted ridership also.
Mr. Chair, as you do that, I think there's a cost per rider, and then what are their other options? I mean, that's something that, I've talked about with 55 BRT and other areas. District 2 stretches into areas with suburban transit providers, and of course, there's lots of pilots with microtransit. But, especially in where we are presently located, it's actually kind of easy to take for granted the C line and the 9 and the Green Line and all of the different types of transit that's available here. That is not true for certainly even all of Hennepin residents, and just for this corridor. I'm of course looking at Commissioner Lundy because of where our districts merge. So yes, it's cost per ride, and like how else would they get around? I mean, you all know how this service is. Even for some of them, the 9 goes down to once an hour for part of it. The service ends at 7 p.m. for some of it. I mean, it's back to 30 minutes, but it's not just who and how much, but what are their options otherwise? And for me personally, at least, even if it's not as many people as in other areas, if this is their only option, then I will gladly stand next to the numbers and beat the drum. So I just wanted to add to that, and I'm a little bit sensitive to some of Crystal service that you've offered feedback on, and of course, all of the East-West. I know Councilmember Chambliss, Commissioner Lundy, myself, so I know I'm kind of saying something that's already been said. I feel the need to mention Golden Valley because they were on their original alignment and no longer. But these are residents that don't have a lot of options or zero options, and that should be a factor too. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm so
No, that's all right.
really excitable today, I guess.
Commissioner Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to ask perhaps you and the team presenting, how do you handle questions like this that are about evaluation that are separate from the FTA's requirements? Because my sense is that, I'm looking at this and sort of seeing what they've accounted for and hearing some interesting input and questions from along the line. Also, in my head is the opportunity cost of doing nothing. Are we competing with Denver and Portland, or are we competing with Omaha, et cetera? So how are these questions handled so that we all feel like we've got good answers?
Chair, committee members, that's a great question. I mean, this is unique in that we are competing for federal funds. But it's also, we're building the vision of the region, the metro vision. It's not just this blue line extension. This connects into the metro vision for the region, which is access, the values of our region too. This does not show, this shows 4 projects comparison, but it doesn't show what networks they have, what their values are in the different regions here. And so, I think that's the vision, up to talking about the vision. Competing for federal funds is important, but it's not the reason we're building this project. So, it's one of the elements to make it a viable project, but.
I think it's a great question, and it goes beyond the federal competitiveness to federal funding. What you're saying is, what's the effectiveness of this investment overall, no matter where the money's coming from?
Yeah, I think there are, as we're verbalizing, there are questions that in a way aren't answered by the FTA's evaluation. And I think, I wanted to tell Mayor Winston, I'm not the mayor of Minneapolis, but I do have downtown Minneapolis in my district. And this project reiterates downtown Minneapolis as the hub of the region economically. There are things like that, how do we tease out those things?
Yeah, not to answer it now, but we might consider, and I appreciate particularly Commissioner Fernando and other comments about the benefits, but we may be needing to think of a framework for that kind of conversation. And factors that are beyond the cost per mile, or some other things that are more easily measured.
And Chair, Commissioner, one of the things, you heard Nick talk earlier today about these are the FTA criteria today. And there's always a consideration. And so we are also helping inform what we as implementers of projects like this see as critical factors that ought to be taken into consideration in advancing these. So you said climate. Climate is big, right? That hasn't been one. Equity. reducing disparities. How do those things play in? Because those three things I just said are not currently in the ranking and maybe should be. And that might change a whole different piece of how things are rated in the future. So we think this project, Blue Line Extension, if FTA ratings changed, would only benefit greater because of the type of services that it's providing.
Great, Mayor Adams, and then Commissioner.
Okay, I'm going to pull back locally a little bit. You know, based on all the conversations we've had tonight, I guess I have a concern in relationship to some of the forecasts. You know, we talked about scope today and how it's so important to make sure we capture all the scope before we move further. We've experienced some tough times not capturing something in scope when we went for a pedestrian in the last alignment. That was a mess. And that's why I want to bring it up now. We have an alignment going through Crystal, which is based on numbers. There's forecasts in some of our vehicle traffic in one section that's at 2040 levels today. So capacity coming through Crystal is becoming a very interesting thing. We're going to base these numbers off of something that we've already surpassed, that's 20 years out. What's that going to do to these estimates? We're about to take away a lane coming through there. Feels to me to be the wrong move, especially in light of that particular stack. So when I look at the stat that's on page 5 of the 6 elements, cost effectiveness is already at a low level. I've been in construction. I know what job creep looks like. I know we're doing our best to try to capture everything. Oftentimes, when you do what you think is above and beyond, we're going to go over. So back to Dr. Watson's original question. Are we going to be able to do this in a cost-effective manner? I don't know. I think we're on thin ice.
Chair, Mayor, I'd just add the impact on traffic as an example of some more information that is coming through the environmental document. And so that will align forecast years of traffic also with new data. And so at the intersection level, we'll see what's the impacts of the proposal on traffic patterns too. So that's part of the environmental process that will bring you information.
Nick, I may just also add to the mayor's piece. If we were here today saying we think we can get this project delivered for $2.2 billion, we just make qualifying for federal ratings based on that, I would say we're on definite thin ice. That is why there are gonna be costs we don't realize yet. That is why we're carrying a greater than 40%, likely greater than 40% contingency right now, and basing the delivery costs on that number, not on what we might be able to deliver the cost for. So that provides, for me anyway, that's what provides me as looking at this entire piece, that we're basing it on what we really believe this project is gonna cost, even taking into account the things we don't yet know.
Commissioner Lundy, sure.
Yeah, I would thank everybody for the robust discussion. I think it might be good, and I'll definitely huddle up with my fellow commissioners to provide a county statement on value, because our value statement is not based on FTA criteria. Our value statement's based on, and I think as the prime source of the funding for the project, that, you know, we're talking about equity, we're talking about opportunity, we're talking about transit, we're talking about the hundreds of thousands of people that will move into our county in the next 20 years. We're talking about historic disparities that we can look at a map and see where demographics and economic disparities all merge into the same map. The overlay is striking, and try how do we change that, which is a key strategic direction of the county. We see transit as one of those pieces that will allow us, not the only piece, but one of those pieces. The fact that North Memorial's on the line, access to healthcare. We, you know, coming out of COVID, the county spent tremendous amount of resources to keep people healthy, keep people here. And so I think that from a county's perspective, our value statement is different than the FTA. We want their money, make no doubt about it. And that's why
Especially at a 1-for-1.
Yeah, and that's why we're in the game of what their value statements are. But that doesn't mean it's only our value. And I would always say that if we don't get that money, it ain't coming back to us. It's going somewhere else. And Minnesota is a net provider to taxes at the federal level. We don't get back to what we contribute. And these projects are us getting our money back. So I don't look at it as their money. I look at it's our money. It's whether we're gonna cash the check or not.
You don't have time anymore, do you?
Great conversation.
Do you have time for one more? Or no?
Sure, go ahead.
It might be more of a statement, if I may. A quick little pivot to the highway world. Being in the highway department, Department of Transportation, this topic about federal requirements, the way they look at the rest of the country, and what criteria you have to fund projects, and then the local, that's becoming I think is a big issue. We have that on our highway world, for example, projects you're familiar with, the 252-94, the Rethinking 94 project. There's some clear, and because we're going through an EIS, there's clear criteria, purpose, and need through the federal process. And you have to meet those to go through that process. And as you meet with locals, like we're here talking about this, there's a totally different needs and criteria that's need to be part of it. A good friend of mine is running a big project in Oregon, in Portland, I-5, the Columbia River, it's on the border of Oregon and Washington, and he worked hard with the federal government and begged to be able to add some livability, I call it, criteria to the federal criteria as they're building it through and they're doing similar things like we were talking about lids and things like that over there, and he couldn't, and it makes it a lot more difficult, and we're facing that right now with the DOT looking at I-94 and 252 and so on. So I think it's a question you asked.
You got the last word.
Yeah, so we've talked about project benefits, and I'm sure we can expand on that based on what we've just discussed here today. Just a couple key takeaways of the 3 points of information we said today. 3 of many points of information you'll get this year. Remains federally competitive, we believe. We show LRT, our ridership is growing. We're coming back from the pandemic. We're not to where we were, but 22 was a growth over 21, 23 was a growth over 22, 24 is already off to growth over 2023. So ridership's coming back. Projects like this will contribute to that also. And I had mentioned before about who the riders are. Our modeling just shows 50% of the riders in that forecasted Blue Line extension are people who do not have vehicles. That's that community on there. This is will be one of their primary modes for access to the region and opportunity. Next steps, we will update the ridership this summer. We'll add new data to that. We might get new guidance from FTA. We'll update our model based on the model they're using, so the numbers we present today will change. And then we will update our cost estimate as we prepare our 30% plans, which are required to submit to the cities and the county for their approval as part of the municipal consent process. And so that will be updated, and we'll present that to you before we begin that process. And we have peer review looking at this so that we have outside eyes looking at our cost estimates, really trying to increase the confidence in our costs. And then we are also looking at what can we change to change that cost in a positive way while still maintaining the project. So that's a value engineering step that is underway also. So these numbers will change, and we want to be transparent that they will change, but we want to say when and why they're changing. And so that's where we're at.
So thanks, Nick, and you mentioned it, I didn't really acknowledge that you have stepped into Chris Beckwith's position, and she has more confidence, but now I have confidence that you're doing a great job, so now you're doing 2 jobs, and Dan, as always, Thank you, everybody. The next meeting is April 11th. This was a great conversation to actually get us deeper into a subject that's very important, and we have more work to do.
Thank
So,
you.
this meeting's adjourned. See you in April. if not
Great,
before.
thanks.